We got 6.
Quorum by 1.
Quorum's 5. We got one extra. You can bunch in together if you want. With that, I'll call. Hey. All right, with that, I'll call a meeting of the Acton Finance Committee of July 25th to order. First item on the agenda is public participation, and I think we can move quickly through that. What we'll be doing tonight is responding to some questions raised by a concerned taxpayer in an email, discussing some topics around the point of view. We are not going to go through the document again. We will be discussing the collective bargaining agreement with the teachers. Paul Murphy, who is the vice chair for Acton, was going to come and explain it all to us, but he had a family situation and had to beg off. So I will be pinch hitting for Paul. So in that case, we may take that one out of order. First item on the agenda is the email of A Nitschelm dated July 6th. I had responded to Alan within days of having received it and dispensed with some of the factual questions like were we involved in the negotiations? We were not. Did we have anybody sitting in the healthcare working group? We did not. None of this was news to Alan. It hasn't changed. Negotiations haven't changed since he was on the FinCom 10 years ago. So, and I told him we would respond in due course to the rest of his questions, but since he addressed them to the whole committee, I did not want to answer on behalf of all of us. I wanted to get some sense of what the rest of you are thinking. So if we just go through it one by one, I will talk a bit about the new teacher's contract later on. If I were to estimate the one-year cost of the contract, it would be about $1.2 million to Acton. Give that to Janet. But I could not estimate all of, there's changes in schedules and some other work rules that I could not estimate the impact of. That would be the straight calculation of the salary. I do not know how much of a raise the average teacher got. A component of the teacher's contract are steps and lanes, which are dependent on achievement of certain degrees or credits and tenure. So some of the younger teachers probably got increases on steps and lanes, and some of the older teachers probably did not. I was hoping Paul might have that answer, but we'll have to get back to him on that one. As far as do we know of any comparative benchmarks or inflation, I've long been under the impression that the term COLA, or short for cost of living, allowance is a misnomer. We really haven't had the kind of inflation or cost of living increases. However, traditionally, in negotiations, especially with collective bargaining agreements, they still refer to COLAs. The only benchmark I know would be Social Security. I'm not that into it yet, but Bob, I don't think Social Security has been going up rapidly over the last 3 years. I don't believe the federal government can discriminate, so I think it's safe to say that cost of living is really a misnomer in this case. They negotiated what they negotiated. They called part of it cost of living and part of it steps and lanes. But I'll go into the details of that later on. The next one, teacher salary is going up in a plurality. I don't know that that's the case, over $100,000. Do we feel that taxpayers should expect some moderation, or will this keep going up? Anybody want to chime in on this? John, use the microphone.
Got it. After getting Nitschelm's email, I reached out to Bill North, who is the longtime math department chairman in the high school, and from time to time has been a union official. And I was particularly focused in on this plurality of 100,000 people who make $100,000 for working 9 months. And the grid is vertically, it's, year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, and then across are the steps and lanes. And he said the highest column of the contract is master's plus 60 credits beyond the master's. And then for the year we're about to get into, 17-18, step 12, which is the final step in the column, pays a teacher $85,563. Then after that, there's what they call off-chart, which is, they call that supermax, and that's an add-on of $900, $925, $950, depending on what column. There's also a one-time $2,800 longevity payment after being at AB for 25 years. A teacher, Bill said a teacher with master's plus 60 would need to be in Acton Boxborough for 25 years to hit 100,000. And he's figuring the 85,563 as the step 12 figure, then 13 hits at the 950 figure plus the $2,800 longevity payment. So here's what's interesting. Next year, there will be only 9 such teachers out of 470. That's 2% of the teaching staff who came before 1992. And that assumes that they're all masters plus 60, which is highly unlikely. A number of those teachers will be retiring in the next several years. And then certainly over the next few years from 17-18 on, there will be additional teachers who will hit that and be in a position to hit the $100,000 threshold. So he says, but as of now, there are only about 45 teachers under 10% with 20 years of service. So there's no way that more than 5% of the staff can hit 6 figures in the next 2 to 3 years. And this is where a lot of teachers feel, really hit hard and undervalued. And he said in his note to me, he said he's dealt with this stuff from Alan over the years. And he said, be free to tell them what my salary is. His salary will increase from $107,300 to $109,700. That's master's plus 60 and 41 consecutive years of service. So it's basically it's a 2% raise. And he says, wouldn't Alan feel that 41 years of service to a school system warranted that? Feel free to quote my salary to him. He often misquotes my salary, by adding in all the other things that I do that have extra contracts for: department head, National Honor Society, math team, class advisor, summer school, etc. So I think that gives you a good, perspective on the plurality of teachers making over $100,000.
Other thoughts? The last time I actually invested any time in looking at average salaries, I think I have 2015 numbers, but Acton Boxborough, at that time, the average teacher salary was around $81,000 a year. A few other communities, Concord Carlisle's average was 95, Lincoln Sudbury was 83, Wayland was 89. Only Westford, the ones I looked at 76, was substantially lower than AB. I also looked at some of the salary scales for some of the other, and with the exception of Westford, most of them have a very similar looking steps and lanes progression as we do. It almost looks like it was written by the same people, and maybe it was. So there is a competitive nature to this. If Concord Carlisle is paying more and Lincoln Sudbury is paying more, who are you going to attract? Are you going to attract the best candidate? So yeah, maybe we can all say that these salaries are getting high, but the fact of the matter is, if you want to have a good school system, you're going to have to pay for some talent, period. And unless every other town decides to start cutting back on increases, I don't see how we can. All right, I think I have enough guidance on that one. Second, Health Insurance Working Group recently finished its secret work. I don't know how secret it was. It is essentially coalition bargaining, a form of collective bargaining, so it needs to be done in executive session. We did not participate. Bob, I don't believe you participated on behalf of the Health Insurance Trust. As far as I know, the negotiators were the negotiating team, the collective bargaining negotiating team from the school committee, which would have been Amy Krishnamurthy, Paul Murphy, and Maria Nayland. And on the town, it was the town manager, Steve Ledoux, the finance director, Steve Barrett, and the HR director, Marianne Fleckner. I asked the town manager if I had missed the Board of Selectmen's vote, and he said I had not, that they did not vote on it. They're not required to vote on it. The town delegates the responsibility for this negotiation to him. What they did negotiate, and as of this moment, all unions have ratified, will result in annual savings of about $762,000. That will be this, I think it's the second year it's fully effective because it phases it in. As far as Alan's question goes, it is, well, he's wrong. The employee share right now is 25%, not 20. And my rough calculation, Bob, and you can correct me, is if we shifted 5% back to the employees, it would save us about the same amount of money, something a bit more than, maybe closer to $800,000, but in the same $750,000 to $800,000 range. The difference here is that this is being accomplished through plan design changes in copays and deductibles, so, and in effect, the employees will be paying more. So I really don't see an issue here. In terms of the last two paragraphs, these are more philosophical questions. In terms of average single-family tax bill, are we becoming uneasy about the burden we're putting on taxpayers? Floor is open. Anybody want to pick that one up? Jason?
I'd say we have been. That's why at our last meeting, one of our newest members made it very clear that he wanted us to have an affordability metric in our point of view, and that is something that we are incorporating. I think, I don't think anybody comes to the Finance Committee and says, hey, great, I'm going to figure out how to raise people's taxes. I mean, we're all trying to strike that balance of making sure that the services that are rendered to the town are the best bang for the buck, while at the same time not exceeding the level of service that we as a town have come to ask for and look for. So, yeah, am I concerned about taking a look at my current tax bill and using the rule of 14 and looking out, 28 years from now and seeing that it's going to be more than my current mortgage payment? Yes, that's that type of math is very scary, but at the same time, that is, I don't think anyone's caught off guard by that when they move into this town.
Other comments?
Could I just
Sure, John.
circle back to the health insurance? This is further from Bill North. The health insurance percentage, as Steve said, didn't go up, but the premiums did, so the actual 25% teachers pay will be a higher amount, and this is important. All of the co-pays essentially are doubling in 2018 and 2019, a year hence, and there will be a deductible of approximately $750 a year per family, so only after that is paid are major things covered. He believes it's cheaper for the system, as people will think twice or three times about having something done that isn't critical if they have to pay the $750 upfront first. In terms of teacher raises, he checked on Google, and it looked like inflation was about 1.87%. So he calculated that veteran teachers are basically getting a raise equal to inflation. Non-veteran teachers, that's 12 years or less, who are on steps are getting double that percentage on average. But note also that the teachers, the younger teachers, pay 11% of their salaries towards their pension.
Thank you. Roland?
Yeah, to double on that, what John was just saying about health insurance, I've seen my co-pays and everything double within the last 2 years. My rates have gone up. That's the way it is. And I'm lucky I have health insurance through my company. When it comes to salaries, I haven't got big raises in the last couple of years, but that's the nature of the beast in the business. So 2%, that's not out of line. I mean, you get what you pay for, I believe, in a lot of instances, and if you don't have a good quality teaching staff, you're going to get bad results. So, I mean, you could get rid of all the teachers and get all first-year students to teach them, and what are we going to get for a result? So, I don't see this being an issue. And I would like to see that I had to pay no taxes to the town, but that's not reality. I understand that. We had to pay for this, as Jason said, we pay for the services that we need. When there's a fire, when somebody breaks in your house or something like that, or you need the police at the fire there, they're there. And I've had to call them, I've had my stove burn up in the fire, and the police were there, and that's what you pay for in a town. And I heard some of my neighbors get taken up by ambulance and stuff like that, so I wish the snow plowing was better. That's gone downhill in the last 2 years, but that will be addressed with the town this year, but anyway.
Anybody else? Tom? Get closer to the microphone.
I know you've got to be a little careful with averages, and these numbers are maybe a year dated, but I did go online and look for average property tax bills by town. And he's right, Acton eclipsed the 10,000 mark at 10,382. That was probably a 2015 figure. That's less than Wayland, Sudbury, Lexington, Concord, Carlisle, and Lincoln. which
Because
are
they
all,
pay their teachers more.
and now it's higher than Burlington, Natick, Bedford, Needham, towns with a high commercial tax base. So I think you need to, consider what we're comparing ourselves to. And in the neighboring towns, I'm not advocating that we be the number one, but we're not off the average by any means. Wayland was the nearest, and they were more than 1,000 a year more than us, and then it goes up from there.
Thanks. Yeah. Dave?
Yeah, I would note that a lot of those communities are generally considered wealthier, obviously, than Acton. And so we had the debate internally a lot, what are comparable communities and what is the best? So if a teacher is trying to decide, I can decide among these 10 school districts, which ones are the best ones with the best benefits, et cetera. I just wanted to make that point. But my bigger point, though, is I think kind of in the spirit of his email is the question is, 4%-ish sort of total budget increases for the school system sustainable? And I think we looked at the longer term plan, and the number gets to in excess of 5% and then down into the 4% range. And I think if you could lose focus on that if you talk about, there's the salary increase is 2%. It may not sound like much, but then there could be a lot of healthcare benefits or whatever else wrapped inside of that. And then when we do look at the budgets and when the ALG looks at them, you are talking 4 to 5+%. And those are the giant numbers that start coming in where they're millions of dollars for each increase. And that's how I read that question is that sustainable? Not necessarily should a teacher make over 100,000 or below 100,000. I mean, frankly, I don't know what the right number is, and I don't really care. It's really what is sustainable.
Well, I mean, this committee has been saying for 6 or 7 years that the rates of increase in spending were not sustainable without a tax increase or serious reductions in services. So I don't think we're silent on it. The question kind of implies that we're just asleep at the switch, and I don't think that's been the case. His last question is more philosophical again. Alan was a member of this committee probably about 10 years ago. He was constantly agitating for a bigger role. He wanted the Finance Committee to be able to present budgets at town meeting. He wanted a few other things. We are considered in the state parlance to be a weak Finance Committee. Weak meaning we're advisory. We don't have a veto authority over any item that goes to the town meeting. Alan was never real comfortable with that. So when he says, well, they just ask for more and then you negotiate down, maybe there's some truth in that, maybe there isn't. But where his question is going is, should we be more adversarial? And that's what I'd like to hear from the rest of you about. There is an Acton leadership group, and it works by consensus. Eventually, each year, we usually get to consensus with the other boards on what the annual budget should be. It's not a requirement, but Alan feels that we're not giving the voters a sufficient choice at town meeting. My view is that we have opposed different boards at different times, and when we are in agreement with the boards, we're in agreement with the boards. There's no need to present an alternative case. So, but like I said, I want to hear from the rest of you. Don't all speak at once.
Well, Mr. Chairman, there was a time when the Finance Committee was more adversarial, and it was not at all uncommon at town meetings to have them make motions to reduce the budgets of the school committee and the budgets of the town. This was very unsuccessful on the part of the Finance Committee because they resoundingly were defeated. My own experience, at least from the school committee perspective, was it wasn't until one of the members of the Finance Committee came to our school committee meetings with a regular basis where there was more discussion that I think they had somewhat more influence in that approach than they did in trying to amend things on town meeting floor. So I see no virtue in this adversarial kind of thing unless you like to go up and get yourself knocked down every time town meeting comes. And to backtrack slightly on your question about whether we're overspending for the citizens of Acton, there's much less concern among those people who attend town meeting about the budgets than there was, say, 20 years ago, which would suggest that the typical townsperson who comes to town meeting is not concerned about this. Those who choose not to come to town meeting must be willing to abide by whatever it is that's going to happen, which suggests that the old adage, I've forgotten which Yale football coach, who said that they should keep the alumni sullen but not mutinous, is perhaps where we are. So I think our attempt to deal with the two spending boards, as Alan refers to them, and to find some accommodation, and to remember that people, when they look at their tax bill, also look at the schools and the fire and the police, and the fact that you can drive on these roads in the wintertime without skidding into a ditch, which is not always true of certain communities that some people have to drive through on their way to and from work, something the lovely train system prevented me from having to experience during many of my years of work a long time ago.
Okay, Roland.
I don't think being adversarial gets us anywhere. It kind of just reminds me of the president. And I don't know if you want to start taking up a Twitter and doing that every day. So
I'm retired. I don't have time for that.
I think it's better when we work with the other boards to reach consensus. And it seems to work a lot better than being adversarial.
Dave?
Yeah, so just being a newer member of the committee, but not the newest, I think the spirit of the Finance Committee is obviously being appointed and we're not an elected board, so we should be, I agree with Bob, as I think historically being adversarial has probably not been very productive. But on the other hand, the way Alan words it here, the go along, get along, cooperative approach, I don't really know what happens in ALG, but if you have two groups that are for spending at X level and one group that is for more restraint, you're already outnumbered. To oversimplify it, is maybe it needs to be a more cooperative approach, or where we do have more of a hard line or more specifics. I don't know, but I think our role should be not go along, get along. I mean, I do think that there's a lot of merit to having us be an objective third party that can sit back and say, yeah, this is good, or how can we balance this better, or we need to keep these numbers in line. But at the end of the day, we're an advisory group, so as you pointed out, we don't have veto power over the budget, et cetera.
ALG is as effective as the people that are on it. Yeah, there's two of us, and we're vastly outnumbered by the administrative staff and the members of the school committee and Board of Selectmen. But it is a body that is, by its own rules, required to meet consensus. And consensus means everybody agrees to support the position. This is my third tour of 2 years No, actually, I'll only do 1 year. No ALG I have been associated with, I would call go along, get along. They tend to be fairly strongly worded statements and not just people deciding, oh, well, let's just go along with that idea because we think we should agree. Quite the contrary. I've been in ALGs that went pretty much down to the 11th hour and reached consensus pretty much only by the moderator who's of the ALG, not the town moderator, but pretty much threatening to keep us held prisoner until we reached an agreement. Janet was there. She can back me up on that one. Brian, you've seen some ALG meetings. Would you consider them to be cooperative in nature and just people going along to get along?
Yeah, I would agree, Steve. I mean, I think, you know, as you said, the whole ALG process is to reach that consensus. Those members of that committee and the ALG have to bring back to those boards, you know, I guess the general ideas of ALG and spending levels and agree on revenues and so on and so forth. So I think just the very fact that you only have 2 members at that table, but those 2 members must bring back to this board, in your particular case, and get a consensus kind of on this board, or at least get a majority vote on what they think is proper spending levels and so on and so forth. So I think, again, you know, and as Bob had mentioned, an adversarial approach I don't think has worked in the past. I've been to town meeting, I've seen that. I think it's only kind of exploded and blown up, but I think currently the process in place, trying to reach a consensus and trying to, you know, work things out, so to speak, to me right now, I think is the best approach. Again, where you're bringing those members of that ALG, you're bringing back to their member boards and committees, you know, to get their opinion on the approach or the correct spending levels, or you know, use of reserves and also revenues and what's appropriate. So I would agree with that approach. I think it's been working.
Jason.
So I've been to precisely 1 ALG meeting, so I can't speak to how effective it is overall. I will say that, just taking what Dave said one step further, I think it is by design that the Finance Committee is, at least at some level, I don't want to use the word adversarial, but it is by design not to be, it is by design to be a check on the other boards in town, being that we are appointed, and some of us lucky enough to be appointed when there were 3 open seats and only 2 people asking to be on the committee. I liked my chances. I still didn't think I was going to get in. By no means do I think it is our role to be adversarial, but it is our role to ask questions. It is our role to be potentially shedding light or uncovering facts that may not be thoroughly comfortable to everyone else around. Under no circumstances should that be adversarial. You know, the old chestnuts of sunlight being the great disinfectant, or my favorite quote reread from the 4th of July, to prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world, to steal from somebody who's a much better writer than I am. I think it is by design that we are not here to go along and get along. I do think it is incumbent upon everyone on the committee to take the responsibility of balancing the request for revenue from the townspeople while still striking the right balance of services. I think that is our singular mission. And if that comes up in conflict with other people's priorities, then so be it. If we can all get to consensus, if we can all get to agreement, if we can all, at the end of the day, say, yes, I honestly believe this is in the best interest of the town, then I think we're all served for it. I watched John McCain today on the floor of the Senate basically say one of the best things that we can do is to, and not that we have any legislative powers, don't worry, I'm not getting ahead of myself here. One of the best things we can do is to get to compromise, even if that means that no one walks out of the room being able to do a fist bump and spike in the football. So this is not easy. We've been lucky in the last couple of years that we have reserves. Those days are ending. We will likely, sorry Dave, I'll use the couching words, we will likely be asking for a very large amount of money for a capital project in the next 2 years. These are hard choices. I don't think you should come here if you want to pal around and go along and get along. You need to put the work in to make sure that you're comfortable with your decisions and your vote at the end of the day. But there's no reason for it to be adversarial.
All right, John.
Yeah, I just have always viewed our role as to be the responsible advisory body and to, help resolve disputes between the school committee and the Board of Selectmen. Last year, we set down budget guidelines, and, both groups came in within those guidelines, so we did a good job there. Just as a measure and a comparison, you could look at the various motions and amendments that Charlie and Alan have brought over the years, invariably to, reduce taxes, reduce spending, and they're hands down defeated at town meeting. And I think that's a very good measure of where the town stands. And, those are, not types. I think we should adopt their tactics and get into bed with them. That's very short-sighted. So I support everyone who's made like comments this evening.
All right, then I will draft a fuller response to Mr. Nitschelm and run it past the members before I send it to him. Okay, moving on. Actually, why don't we move on to the school contract, which is a couple pages into the packet. So the school committee typically appoints a negotiations subcommittee. These are the three people I named earlier, and they conduct negotiations with the Acton Boxborough Education Association, which represents, I'm thinking most, if not all, of the teachers. And what they agreed to is on the second page. So to put it in some perspective, there's two elements to the raise. One is what they call steps and lanes and supermax, and that's basically the salary grids that we were talking to earlier. It starts with bachelor's at no experience and goes to whatever, master's plus 60 credits, whatever. So those, as individuals hit those milestones, and some are based on education and some are based on longevity, they move up this grid. So those steps and lanes, on average, raise the entire salary budget 2.3% per year. As the slide says, it may only be 1% for veteran teachers, but 3 or 4% for new teachers. So then the second element of the contract is what they're calling cost of living adjustments. So for FY18, the first year, it's 1.5%. For FY19, it is 1.25%. percent on day one, plus halfway through the year, 2.25. So FY19 works out closer to 2.4%. In FY20, day one is 1%, halfway through the year is 1.5. And so that year comes out to 1.8%. Yes?
Could you explain the day one plus and the halfway through, are those two, so at the beginning of the year, they get 1.25% raise, and then halfway through, they get boosted up another 1%? Or they get
Right.
boosted up another 2.25%?
No, they would get up another 2.25%.
For a total of 3.5?
Yeah. So they also negotiated, like I said, some calendar changes, and there's a couple other work rules. If you go to the next page where I attempted to quantify the impact of the contract, so as you can see in FY18, the steps and lanes, 2.3%, the COLA is 1.5, for a total of 3.8. FY19, they total 4.7. FY20, they total 4.1. Over 3 years, we're talking about increasing the teacher's contract by $4.462 million. The Acton's percent was roughly somewhere between 84 and 85, so I used 85. So over 3 years, it's going to cost the town of Acton $3.8 million. So on average for the 3 years, $1,264,000. Footnote: I'm going off of their object budget for the district salaries, teaching element 01, which is for FY17, the base year was $33,972,000. There may be other individuals in other line items the contract also applies to, maybe counselors or somewhere else, but it wouldn't be a huge amount of money. So that is the best I can do to quantify the impact of the teacher's contract.
Steve?
Yes.
So where you have the total increase of 12.6, you're not capturing the compounding, correct? This looks like it's a straight.
No, I think I got it.
If it's 3,847 and 41, that does add up to 12.6. But if you're starting at salary of X, the salary at 3 years plus is not going to be 12.6. Not going to be 112.6. It's going to be more than that because it's compounded.
Oh, yeah. It's
13.1.
That's over on
Okay.
on the other side.
Okay. So that does seem pretty rich to me at first blush. I guarantee you I'm not going to get a 13% raise over the next 3 years.
Well, we really don't want to go into that. There may be some very good reasons. Other comments? Christine, you have been remarkably quiet tonight. Tom, you got anything to say? I'll pick on the new people.
I guess just a clarifying question. This is assuming, I assume, the static number of teachers, no increase or decrease.
Yes. Yeah.
Is that a good assumption?
I believe it is. Over the last couple of years, I've seen some redeployment of headcount as enrollment shrinks. Sometimes classroom sections can be eliminated, but they have been tending to meet greater needs in terms of ESL programs and school psychologists and counselors. So the overall headcounts remain fairly steady.
I guess I would agree that it does seem fairly generous, and, one way to maybe accommodate it is with fewer teachers, but that is what it is.
I don't think enrollment's going to allow for fewer teachers. Just to get on my enrollment kick, you'll learn I'm usually on that topic.
Do you have any idea how this has trended over time? And unfairly, to use CPI, I mean, I don't want to side with Alan on that, but it's at least some benchmark, at least is some number that, I mean, if you look at the compounded growth rate is 4.1% a year of this. So if you look at it just on an absolute basis, I mean, relative to my compounded growth, looks relatively good, but I don't have any other context.
In the past, I would say, I don't recall one averaging 4% recently, but I can certainly say that I think they averaged in the 3s, 3.5.
And that would be through the downturn as well.
In the downturn, there was one year they took nothing, 0. So, there has been some responsiveness to, there was one year, I forget which one it was, that basically all the town employees took a 0% increase. But like I said, the thing you have to remember is somewhat what John was saying about the aging out of the teaching population. A few years ago, we had a very senior group of teachers, and they've been replaced. I think they've been retiring at 10 or 12 a year for a few years, and younger people are coming in. So even though the scale is moving up, I don't know that the average teacher salary has moved up at a compounded rate of 3.5 or 4% over the last X number of years.
Does that mean 5 or 10 years from now we could find ourselves in a bad situation? If the base is going up and and I'm going to say this jokingly, blessed by having lost tenured teachers, does mean that your base salary responsibility with a guaranteed 2.3 step and lane every year, which is not bad and low inflation rates anyway, does this not mean that 5-10 years from now we got ourselves in a shoe?
It's a function of the age of the teachers. A few years ago, we wouldn't have been talking about steps and lanes of 2.3%. We'd been talking about steps and lanes accounting for 1% because the teachers were all further up the grid.
They were all in Supermax.
Yeah. So it becomes a question. And let's face it, if you are running a school system, it's a people business, and the principal people you have are your teachers.
I get that.
And I don't know that Concord Carlisle pay that much more. I don't know that they'd pay a new teacher, say a master's in a couple years experience, a whole lot more than Acton would pay them. But I'm thinking if their averages were that high, it's because their population of teachers are further along in their careers as opposed to a new group.
Yeah.
So are the steps much higher for more senior teachers or lower?
When does Supermax kick in?
I think it's the 12 steps. After 12 years, there's no more
steps.
experience rated
After 12 years,
step.
there's no more steps.
But you can
I see.
you can still progress by getting more education, more credits.
Yeah, just keep in mind in your thinking that our teachers are paid less, teach more kids, teach more classes than to the school systems to the east of us, of which we're compared. That's Concord Carlisle, Lincoln Sudbury, Lexington, Newton, Wellesley. And, you know, I think all of you people are, you know, in the private sector, and there's a risk reward aspect to it. You know, municipal people, teachers, you know, town employees, yeah, I mean, you know, they're in it, they're not making big bucks. You know, they get cost of living and other modest raises. When the town rocks, as it has in earlier years, and people are flush in their bonuses and their equity awards, and there's home additions and all sorts of fancy vehicles and vacations, teachers don't participate in that, and you know, nobody's willing to share that with many of them. So I think you always have to, you know, keep that in mind.
All right.
So but just past FY '20, there'd be no reason to think that these numbers would be not in excess of 4%.
I'm not that good at predicting the future.
Well, I mean, if the steps are 2.3, they'd be unlikely to come down that much.
No, they would.
And the cost of living adjustment would likely be 1 to 2%.
As the existing population of teachers gets older, the steps in the lanes probably will come down.
But that's further out.
Like I said, in the past, it had been a much lower number than as they start to retire. Younger teachers are more apt to get steps in lane increases than older teachers.
Sure. I mean, it just kind of comes back to the question of, you know, if the 38 million of the budget or 35 million is for, this excludes obviously health insurance and so on, is 4 to 5%. I'm not picking on the teachers or anybody else. I'm just asking is, like, how long can that continue?
Well, I mean, if you go back a couple of pages to the one with all the tiny numbers on it, it says summary. About a quarter of the way down the page is a line called increase in revenue excluding reserves and untaxed levy capacity. And it's $2.8 million. And in FY19, and 2.9 in FY18, to closer to 3 in FY20. But when you look at what we just are going to pay for the teacher's contract alone, that's $1.2 million. So that's a big piece of the revenue pie.
So where you have the percent line directly below there, that percent is...
It's a revenue.
Right, and being capped by Prop 2.5. Am I reading this correctly? Are you suggesting that starting in FY18, we're going to have a budget override every year?
That's not the purpose of this exhibit. You can draw your own conclusions.
Am I misreading what you're presenting?
Well, I was taking it out of order. This is basically last year's ALG plan with some changes. What I did was take out the one-time money, which are reserves and untaxed levy capacity, and say, well, what's our real revenue growth look like? And it looks like it's 3.2, 3.4%.
From a purely political perspective, does this body feel that it is, do we like our chances at 3 consecutive operating overrides year over year?
Let me say this. During the initial years of 2.5, I think in the late 80s to the early 90s, we had operational overrides pretty regularly. Then we had 2 defeats in 93 and 1 defeat in 94. And they didn't, the school and town leadership just didn't attempt another override until all finances were drained till till 2003, and the way they muddled through that is when people left, they didn't hire replacements, and it was a real struggle. But over the years, both bodies built up considerable credibility in the town. There was really no reserves, and we went out in a very ordered way and sold an override in 2003, and we told them we'll be back in 2 years, and came back again in 2005. And you know, those campaigns were very activist on both sides. They were very highly fought. And you know, I think the leadership has done a remarkable job, because we haven't had an override in 12 years. But at some point, you'll have to have one. And you know, as you tell Charlie Cadillac, you know, an override is not prohibited. I mean, it's permissible under the 2.5 law. It's just
not disagreeing with you. I'm just asking what you think our chances are of doing 3 consecutive years of capital overrides.
Well,
You're talking capital or operational?
Sorry, operational. I said operational originally.
Time out. Work the chair in occasionally. In fact, Jason, we probably wouldn't go year after year after year. The history is, like John said, you'd go for one and not go for another one in a couple of years. However, I would say our chances are better than even, but not a lot more. The override votes have been, in the early 90s, they were kind of easy. Since that, they've been close. They've been close every time.
We did carry in 03 and 05 by comfortable margins, but it was a lot of work, a real effort.
So now that I've made the mistake of putting numbers in front of, obviously, a group that's looking for numbers to analyze, let's go back to the page before that, which is really what I want to talk about. Yep. So it occurred to me as we were wordsmithing the point of view that some of us were wordsmithing because we didn't particularly like what it said, as opposed to how to say it correctly. So what I wanted to go back over is some basic assumptions about what we have in it and whether we are all in agreement, or whether there's, now given that we have 3 members absent, we may have to do this again, but I want to get some sense of where we stand. Right now, that FY19 plan that we took from ALG has in it the use of $835,000 worth of untaxed levy capacity. It also has $1.3 million in reserves. Now, both of these are one-time money. But as Bob pointed out a while ago, only one of them affects the tax rate. Untaxed levy capacity will drive your tax rate up more than 2.5%. Nevertheless, with the inclusion of $835,000 in untaxed levy capacity and $1.3 million in reserves, basically coming from free cash, FY19 was still showing a $2.2 million deficit. Now, so when we start talking about recommendations, we need to figure out a way to make a recommendation that closes that $2 million gap, probably through the increase in spending budgets. We also need to take the question of, we have a $2 million stabilization fund. Are we going to support using any or all of that for operating budgets? Would we allow it to be used for capital, or a little of both? And when we get all these ones answered, we can answer the question, is there need an override? So let me hear some opinions. Jason, you wanted to talk about this?
I am very concerned about having too large a tax increase prior to the capital override that I feel is likely in the next 2 years.
Override, you talking about the new school?
Yep.
Okay.
I'll restate what I said last meeting, which is that I think that from a school building infrastructure capital perspective, we have allowed things to go too long. So if I had to choose where to put more emphasis than what has been done in the past, I would put it towards capital. And I'm also very worried about having, taxing to the max per 2.5%, and then including all of the untaxed levy capacity. I am very concerned about it being not a good time to do that when we've got to take out a capital bond in the near future. That said, I don't know how to close this gap, being that I don't see us having a whole lot of discretionary things that we can do anything about. So I fear we're in not a good year. So I'm actually quite concerned about this. I would love not to have to do this. Your question about, do we use the untaxed levy capacity, or do we have to go for an override now? I think those two options both suck, if you pardon my language. But I definitely think going for an operating override now with potentially a capital override within 16 months is unlikely to be successful. Your second question about the $2 million in stabilization fund, knowing that takes a larger vote to spend it, I definitely think that the stabilization fund, knowing that all these monies are completely fungible, but how you present it can be important. I think the stabilization fund money should absolutely be earmarked towards capital projects. Did I answer your questions?
Sure. Who would like to be next? Roland?
I agree. I think, I wouldn't mind seeing the stabilization fund being used if you needed to. I think it should be used first as capital, but I could also see using some of it to support operating budget if we have to, if we cannot trim some of the operating budget. I don't know where the operating budget can be trimmed at this point right now until we go through our budget Saturday, et cetera.
It's early days on that, but.
Yeah, and so I think that's, something that town staff is going to need to look at real closely, where they can trim back on the budgets, things that they would like versus things that you need. As I've heard in church several times, our wants are many, our needs are few. What are the wants versus the needs of the town right now, and things that are nice to have, maybe we don't need this year. If they want another 5 new pickup trucks and we only need 1, well, why are we looking for 5? We know we're going to need a new fire truck for the next 4 years out. They should look at combining those to save on bonding costs and to save on interest costs, is most likely going to happen. We'll probably get interest rate rise next year again, and it'll drive up our costing for financing these things. So maybe using some of the stabilization fund to buy a fire truck might be a good idea, or using some of the reserves to buy a fire truck instead of going out and bonding it again. I don't know. It's something that should need to be looked at. In number, like also number 7, the OPEB, yeah, we just still got to keep on funding that. I think some of the assumptions that a lot of these places have, a lot of the cities and towns have, is they expect to get a 7% rate of return on their money. And that's really not feasible. It's not.
Okay.
So.
Dave, what about you?
Yeah, I just kind of chuckle that stabilization fund, I mean, support operating budget, support capital budget, support both, is, none of those are obviously what a stabilization fund is there for. So I mean, maybe it's worth taking a step back, as I think as yourself and Jason have been advocating for more of a intermediate to longer term view of things. I mean, I don't know. I don't have any good answers either. It's clear that things will be challenging in the near term, but I think we want to be cognizant of multiple overrides to the town. I think we want to be, careful with the school requirements and utilize that, and not necessarily step in with an operating override now and then say, oh, by the way, there'll be 2 capital overrides on the tail end of that in following years. So there's probably a lot of political capital built up in not having overrides for a number of years. I don't think we should squander that. I had a deliberately somber tone there.
Since you're the clerk, you can denote that any way you wish. Tom?
I guess it's a little difficult for me to have a strong opinion because I'm new here.
It's your second meeting, you're supposed to have all the answers.
Did I give you the speech about, you probably missed it, you're allowed to say I'm new here for the first year. After that, never again.
No, I understand. But, I'm looking at just single line items for municipal spending for the ABRSD assessment. So it's, without knowing how you get to those numbers, there's a lot more granularity on the revenue piece up top. And I don't know how certain some of those numbers are. But I just don't know what wiggle room there is in the spending to.
There's usually, I'll come right out and say it. There's usually about 0.5% at least cushion in the spending budgets. That's how we get turnbacks every year. Am I stretching the truth on that one, Brian? 1%. Would you care to give me a turnback number right now? Total revenue and?
Don't know total revenue. I can tell you this, our revenue projections are, we're beating our revenue projections. So I can tell you, Mr. Chairman, that we're beating our revenue projections. We've done some preliminary calcs. One of the things is some uncertainty. I mean, DOR there's non-recurring and recurring revenues on the tax recap. There's some of it is related to tax title. Tax title is part of your accrual-based accounting. When you put your bills out in the street, you book that receivable. But if you don't collect it in that year, you collect it in a subsequent year. It comes in as a non-recurring revenue, but DOR doesn't allow you to put that on the recap because it was part of your accrual from the year prior. But they do allow you to take like the late interest on that, the interest that was accrued on that. So there's those types of things we're looking at right now. But I can tell you, we may be beating our revenue projections, somewhere in the tune of $500,000. The uncertainty right now would be those, what we call the statutory adjustments, those things that DOR hits you for, and, in changes in the prior year liabilities. For instance, if you overspend a grant, which you can run grants into a deficit, and you have a change in that grant, they hit you for those types of things. So there's a lot of moving parts there. So that could drastically change those numbers as well. That's where we're uncertain. We'll be getting a better handle on that over the next few weeks, and I can report back. But so there's uncertainty in that particular area right now.
But since the working assumption is 900,000 on turnbacks.
We think we're going to
pretty
beat
close to that.
We think we're going to beat that projection.
Okay. You're not going to kill it, but you're going to beat it. Okay. So, now, in your case, Tom, it's more philosophical. You're not expected to know much about the details. So there's a bit of a cushion in the spending, but yeah, 1% would be stretching it.
Okay. And, you know, again, to the extent that using up stabilization fund dollars to balance this would impact or could impact our credit rating, I think is important. With a big, you know, bond issuance coming up in the next couple of years, maintaining a AAA rating is not insignificant.
Okay. Christine, now you're going to have to talk because I called on you.
You did. Sneaky. I don't want to spend any of the money in any of these pots, but until we get, you know, spending numbers in front of us and we can really look at it, I mean, you know, I think we should be as conservative as possible, but whatever that might mean depends on what I see in front of me, and, you know, if it's being spent where it's absolutely needed, then, like Jason said, we're in a tight position this year.
Bob?
The projection for FY18 for spending was 3.7%. For 20, it's 4.4, but 19, you've got 5. I'm sure it's quite legitimate, but that's the place where I would begin to see if you can't, we can't, they can't, everybody can't get that 5% down closer to maybe the average of 3.7 plus 4.4, around 4%. That 4% would look, then you go down to unused levy capacity and free cash, and you get a spending increase of 3.8. I think it's not unreasonable to go to town meeting and say you want to spend an extra 4%, then there's no particular reason why you shouldn't raise your taxes by 3.8% in order to cover it. So that's the playpen that I would like to see us end up in.
I mean, again, the expenditure numbers are preliminary. At ALG, I asked if they would reestimate quickly because we have a town meeting coming up in December. I didn't get a whole lot of love. The 5 is being driven off the school assessments being driven off the fact that the regionalization savings, the Appendix A, and the cost is basically run its course. So for the last 5 years or so, we've been shifting costs to Boxborough per the original agreement, and now I don't believe we have that, or it's down to a very small amount of money. Brian, I didn't ask for your opinion.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, one thing I do want to point out is for fiscal 19, we do have a Minuteman capital assessment, which we don't believe is in this figure right here of $1,172,929.
Oh, yeah.
So this, you know, there's some talk about whether we, you know, you put that on a town meeting warrant as a debt exclusion override and we take it to the ballot, or do we consume that within the constraints of Prop 2.5? It's about a $250,000 assessment in year 1, and I think from year 2 and on, it might go up a little bit and then kind of comes back down, but I know it goes up over 300,000. So that, I believe, right now is not being shown in this plan as well. So that would drive this into a further deficit.
Okay. Just thought I really wanted to hear that. Yeah. I remember that item coming up at ALG. John, I didn't get to you. Okay. All right. So I'm hearing. I don't know what I'm hearing. I'm hearing some people don't want to hit the untaxed levy capacity. Some people are okay with it. Not a lot of support for hitting the stabilization fund for any purpose. So what we really need to focus on is what kind of an increase are we going to recommend for the spending budgets, which at this point, where are we, 3 something? Increase in spending budgets, point of view. What did you say?
4, right? The 4
No, I'm looking at the last version of the point of view.
Okay, hang on a second.
I thought you memorized the document. 3.3, okay. No, that's revenue.
Oh, the number that was in there was a holdover from last year. So
Okay.
it was, and it's in red because it's purposely left completely to be determined as we're pointed this. Currently, currently we have in this 4.1
Okay.
in the recommendation, but that was literally a holdover from last time.
All right, given that I'm not sensing a real consensus and we have 3 members missing, I think we'll terminate the discussion till we have more people on hand. I don't want to take any straw votes with 1/3 of my voting members not present. So with that, we will move on to committee reports. I have a committee report. I went to the Board of Selectmen meeting, and I'm getting real tired of this, so I really am looking for a volunteer to cover the Board of Selectmen. I would have gone to this one anyway because there was a presentation by a consultant we engaged to review our fire stations and fire coverage. The conclusions they reached, they were pretty well known to the Capital Committee anyway, that the existing 3 fire stations are in not great shape, but are serviceable. They pointed out that a 4th station located at Harris Street on the town property that we recently acquired would be an ideal place to basically get just about the entire town response times down to what are considered acceptable norms in terms of both fire and EMS. The fire chief indicated that in his estimation, it would be possible to man a 4th station without increasing the current head count. So the Board of Selectmen authorized the town manager to pursue looking into, I guess, preliminary designs and cost estimates on a fire station for North Acton, plus they also recommended renovations for the center fire station, such that it would be able to take the ladder truck, which is currently housed at South Acton, and would be able to house the shift commander, because it's a central location. The only other thing that I stayed for was the sewer operations and maintenance rates are going to go up 2.5%. It's the first increase they've had, I think, in about 5 years on sewer O&M. So and that's about it for the Board of Selectmen. Other committee reports. Roland.
I have one on CPC from the state level, that they didn't get an override or additional funding from the governor this year. No surprise there. So they want to get more out of receipts from their funding mechanism, which is the Registry of Deeds, but with other towns adopting it, the match money is going to be lower this year. Boston last year adopted it.
Okay.
So that's going to be big there.
So what is there any estimate of what percentage match it's going to be?
We won't know. So, you know, they were looking for the governor to put an extra $50 million into the fund this year, or at least $40 million. I thought it was kind of with all the other things that the state has to face. Yeah, it'd be a big stretch. So they got nothing. So it doesn't surprise me.
Other committee reports. Bob.
It's not a committee report so much as it just is some numbers
We like numbers.
on cash flow from health insurance trusts. We estimated on a cash flow basis spending $15 million on paid claims. We have in fact spent 13.6. So you have a significant variance there. IBNR is about $818,000, which is approximately what we have in the budget for it. Medics had a positive variance of $88,000, but that's after a 6% increase from a year ago, but it's on an 18-month budget, so that 6% increase, which was a 4 plus 4, 4% in June, 4% the first of 17, and they have, that variance is about 5% of their costs. So presumably, at least for the first 12 of the 18 months, if we'd only increased their cost by 1%, we would have broken even. So what this foretells in terms of the rate increase that we will vote for medics starting in January, which would run from January of 18 through December of 18, is hard to say, partially because we don't know what Tufts and Blue Cross are going to do for their equivalent kinds of programs, and we'll be obviously looking closely at that. The other thing about medics, which is sort of interesting, is that on the 1st of January, or the first month of this last fiscal year, we had 454 members. At the last month, we had 482. So as teachers and other employees of the town retire, our medics population will keep growing, including, I presume, the town manager when he leaves, but I'm not sure of his age, so he may not be quite eligible for it.
I don't know how old he is. Yeah, I think he's in his 60s, that's for sure. 60, okay, so he's going to have to wait a year. Okay, the next meeting will be devoted to training. It is required for Jeff, Christine, Christy, and Tom. It is not required for anybody else. You are welcome to come.
I'll be quiet.
You can participate. They'll get very tired of hearing my voice and Brian's voice by the end of the evening, so feel free to come. But other than that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? We're adjourned.